Did you choose your own life? Or did you walk the path every man was expected to walk? Were you ever taught how to become a whole man? Or were you just given a checklist to follow and mark off? The same exact checklist every man was handed. This is not a trick question. This is a real one, because there's a difference between becoming grounded and simply moving from one box to the next, and almost no one talks about it. From a young age, the message was simple, not spoken out loud, but reinforced everywhere. Do well in school, get a job, be responsible, find a woman, get married, have children, buy the house, carry the weight, don't complain. On paper, it looks like stability. From the outside, it looks like success. But nowhere in that list is there a single instruction about who you are or how to become whole, only what you're expected to accomplish. That path builds capable men. It builds responsibility. It builds discipline. But capability is not the same as clarity or identity. You can complete every item on that list and still feel empty and unsettled, still feel restless, still feel like something is missing. Not because you failed, but because completion is not the same as construction. You were taught what to build on the outside, but not how to build yourself from the inside. So you become accomplished without being anchored. You become responsible without being rooted. Functional without being whole. Why this matters? A man without a foundation doesn't collapse immediately. He keeps going. He adapts. He absorbs pressure. He makes adjustments. From the outside, he looks fine. But inside, he's reacting instead of directing. And over time, it costs him something he can't immediately identify. Not his confidence, not his strength. What he loses is direction. He keeps moving forward, doing what's expected, meeting responsibilities. But those choices are no longer intentional. His life begins to follow a path that feels as though it's already decided for him, rather than shaped by him. Nothing dramatic happens. There's no single moment where it all goes wrong. It's the slow realization that he's been moving through life without ever asking himself, is this the life I actually wanted to build? You start measuring your life by milestones instead of alignment. You ask, what's next? Instead of, is this right for me? You tolerate situations you shouldn't because they technically fit the plan. You stay longer than you should because walking away would disrupt the sequence. And eventually, your life becomes organized, but not directed. Busy, but not intentional. Relationships become the center by default. This is where things get dangerous. Because when a man hasn't been taught how to stand on his own confidently, he starts using relationships as a stabilizer. Not because he's weak, because he was never shown an alternative. A relationship should be an addition to a man's life, not the framework that supports it. And when that happens, he stops directing his own life. He starts adjusting himself to preserve the structure. No one warns you about this. Not at school, not at work, not in our culture. The cost is subtle. You lose the ability to ask, is this still right for me? Because asking that question would dismantle that checklist. So you give up clarity just to keep the machine moving. You trade truth for stability. And the longer you do that, the harder it becomes to remember what you actually really want. Here's the quiet trap. You're taught responsibility early. Show up, provide, be dependable, carry your share. But responsibility without authority turns into obligation. And obligation without choice turns into resentment. Not explosive resentment, the quiet kind. The kind that drains you slowly. Becoming a man is not a checklist. It's a process of orientation. Knowing what you value, knowing who and what you will tolerate, knowing what you'll accept and what you won't. Completion tracks milestones. Identity determines who you're becoming in the process. One builds a resume, the other builds a backbone. This is why so many men reach a point where everything looks right, but feels wrong. The job is secured, the responsibilities are fulfilled, the structure is in place, but there's no internal command center. So decisions feel heavy, boundaries feel risky, change feels threatening. Not because you're incapable, but because you were never taught how to anchor yourself before building a life without a foundation. What should have been taught first wasn't achievement, it was frame. How to orient your life around principles instead of approval. How to choose deliberately instead of just going through the motions. How to say yes without losing yourself and no without guilt. That's not rebellion. That's clarity. That's autonomy. Here's the reframe that matters. A relationship is not a milestone, it's a reflection. A career is not an identity, it's an expression. Responsibility is not a sentence, it's a choice or it becomes a burden. When a man builds himself first, everything else has a place to land. When he doesn't, everything else takes priority. So let me ask you again, and this time, answer it honestly. Were you taught how to become a whole man? Or were you just taught how to follow a checklist? Because those two paths lead to very different lives. And if no one ever taught you the difference, the cost shows up later in confusion, self-abandonment, resentment, and loss of direction. Becoming a whole man is built from the inside out. Seeing that clearly now isn't failure. It's the turning point. It's the moment responsibility stops being external and becomes conscious. That's where your authentic self rises and takes control. And recognizing that now, that's the beginning of something real. And now, you're in the driver's seat.